Welcome back to Call Me by Your Game, the podcast where I, your host, Connor McCabe, bring on a guest to hear from them about a meaningful or memorable video game from a particular moment in their life. On the show, we talk as much about what made playing that game special and memorable and what our guest remembers loving about it, as we will get into the context of that time in the life of the person who is bringing on this game today. I've got a bit of housekeeping up top, and the first things first is if my guests, or I, not if, but when my guests and I plug stuff today, you could Google it, but you can also just click an easy link in the show notes, so feel free to scroll down there and find whatever things we shared that you are interested in, which I'm going to assume is everything, starting with the social media for our podcast. If you are on social media and you want to interact with us, you can do that a few different places. We're on Instagram, Twitter, and Blue Sky. There you can see what episodes we have coming out every week. You can learn a little bit about our guest and how you can support them if they've got other things going on the internet as well. And you can see the cool art I make for every episode. You can also support the show a few different ways. You can leave us a rating and review wherever you get your podcasts. If you leave one somewhere that's not Apple Podcasts, feel free to share that with me, because those podcast reviews not only mean a lot to me to read and see what people are enjoying and favorite episodes and stuff like that, but they help more people find us. And then you can also share the show with a friend, whether they love video games in general or the game we've brought on for the main event today. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel, where if you're listening to the audio version of this podcast, there is a video version that exists as well, where you can see what I look like, the room I record in, the game I've decided to put on the shelf behind me, which who knows if I'm even playing it. But yeah, check us out on YouTube as well. And lastly, you can check us out on Patreon. We're over at patreon.com/super NPC radio, where you can find, if you like me, a bunch of bonus podcasts that I'm on that network that I helped found a few years ago. And one of the main events that you get there by supporting us each month is our Games Club series. And I don't believe that we must have had this figured out by last time's recording. But if you're listening to this now, we have started our Resident Evil 2 remake Games Club series, where we're going through that with a fine-tooth comb for about 10 weeks, and it'll take us to the end of the year. And those episodes come out every Friday. So if you love that game or you're interested in playing something scary right now, check us out there. That'll do it for the housekeeping, and I finally can introduce our guest for this episode. So please welcome podcaster Drew Mackie.
Hello, thank you for having me, Connor.
You are so welcome. I couldn't help but notice that you are wearing a Toronto Blue Jays t-shirt. It's a wonderful baby blue. I'm going to just dig into that right now. Are you a Blue Jays fan? Were you like, that shirt looks nice and I'm going to get that? I've got to know the story.
It belongs to a guy I dated a long time ago. It is very shrunken from many washings and doesn't really
Yes.
fit me any well. Today's laundry day, and I sort of didn't think about that until we were sitting down to record and was like, oh yeah, there's a video element to this. It's fine. So you're seeing me wearing something I would normally do like chores in.
Yes.
I am aware that the Blue Jays are a baseball team. I've never been to Toronto. I have no particular affiliation towards them or any other baseball team other than the Dodgers, but that's because I like to drink beer in the daylight, and therefore I like going to Dodger Stadium.
That makes sense. A, thank you for giving me such a thorough rundown. And B, after asking you, now I realize you may have, because we talked about the video element earlier, you may have been like, oh no, what if this gets asked about? And it happened.
It didn't not really occur to me until this was starting, and then we're just in it now. So now I've revealed that I don't particularly like baseball, but I do like beer.
Hey, there we go. One B out, one B in.
Mhm.
I think that's how it goes. But Drew, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. I'm so excited to talk to you about all sorts of stuff, mostly I assume video game related. But I always talk about how I know my guest on the show. You and I have become familiar recently, because we both guested on the same episode of Nintendo Cartridge Society, where we helped our friends Patrick and Mark rank their hobby horses. And now that we're a few weeks away from that experience, what are your feelings on that at this point?
we are best friends, number one, you and I.
Amen.
Number two, I thought we did a great job. And then it's really funny too. I don't know if Mark used this word when he was discussing it with you. The phrase he used with me was pod cucking,
Yeah, that's right.
which he did not use on Mike because they have a G-rated podcast. And this is not a G-rated podcast, I assume, right?
Correct.
Okay. Which I think it was really interesting to be invited to podcuck someone in such a public space,
Yes.
and thoroughly enjoyable. But I'm still stung by that person on Discord who did not like what we did.
Yes, I was I mean, look, I guess you have a popular podcast like we both do shows. You never know when someone is going to find like a particular or like develop a particular disdain for an episode or a voice or whatever, and I was surprised by that too, but I guess, it can happen.
Yeah, we're not the right pair for that person. I thought we did a really good job,
Me
like
too.
an excellent job, if I can say that.
Especially considering the task at hand. I think we even maybe discussed that like immediately after the show, but that was a tall task of ranking our friends like most common topics that they bring up on the show base in a basic way to describe it. And going into it, I was extremely nervous, but coming out of it, I was really proud of us. And that's what, bonded us and, now being best friends.
Best friends, yeah. Mhm.
So that's how we know each other and how we've become a little familiar recently. But what do you want to share about yourself with the listener? What are you up to outside of this show?
So I have my own podcast that is not about video games, even though I love video games a lot. It is called Gayest Episode Ever, and my co-host and I talk about gay episodes of classic sitcoms, not just gay, but like lesbian, bisexual, trans episodes of classic sitcoms. And we've done like more than 200 episodes, which seems like a
Wow.
lot. And it's really weird to reflect on that. But it is a very similar muscle going very deep on a sitcom that maybe no one gives a shit about and trying to find reasons why, hey, actually, this is worth your time. Here's why it is worth your consideration if you've always dismissed it. Sort of a similar vibe to what NCS does, and also so what this podcast does. Like you're asking people for their deep digs, like come in with something that's meaningful to them. That's
Yeah,
actually my favorite sort of guest to have on is like pick something that you think no one else cares about, and then like try to convince the audience that it is of value.
totally.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. I haven't looked down the catalog of Gayest Episode Ever. Have you done an episode about community yet?
We haven't because we
Ooh,
tend to do stuff. My favorite stuff is stuff that aired before the 2000s
yes.
because the more standard sitcom something is, it's easier to compare it to like I Love Lucy
Mm,
than it is like when you get into 30 Rock and like Modern Family and Community, things don't feel like a sitcom anymore, even though they're still doing the job of being funny. And
yes,
it is not only a different beast to talk about critically, they pack so much more in because there's cutaways and
of
the
course.
amount of like clips I have to put in, the amount of explanation we have to do is just adds to the runtime. So you're doing
Wow.
a lot more. Like if it's like the honeymooners, they're on one set the entire time.
Yeah.
They don't move from it. It's very you don't have to set up very much. But like Community plays more like Family Guy than it does like an old timey sitcom, and there's just a lot to those structurally. But yeah, we got to do either the one where Britta thinks she's dating a woman who turns out is also straight and thinks that Britta's a
Yes.
lesbian, or any Dean episode. But there's so many Dean episodes that I'm almost overwhelmed by like, where do we even start? Like, it's
Yeah.
he's such a complicated person.
It's like so early on in that well, first of all, thank you for answering the question. That is a tall you're no stranger to tall tasks, Drew, when it comes to podcasting. Yeah, that episode, I think it's in season 1 where he's like watching like some Dalmatian like dance video, and he says, I hope this doesn't awaken anything in me. That's maybe not the first time we get a hint of what's to come for the Dean, but it
Mhm.
is a memorable one. But do you have a particular like episode that you're like, oh, I think this is a standout one we've done that you would point someone to if they were jumping into your podcast?
Yeah, so episode 10 is something that aired during the first season of Cheers, where the locals at the bar think that there are gay men hanging out in the bar, and they mostly have a really negative reaction. And Shelley Long's character has to try to explain why they're being stupid. And she actually does a really good job
Oh,
of
wow.
demonstrating how a straight person can be an ally, how
Hmm.
like how you're not overreaching and you're not injecting yourself in a situation that isn't your fight. She's just a really really good example of how to advocate for a group that you're not part of. And it's also just a really well written episode, and Cheers makes me so happy to watch. So that is like our go-to for this is a great episode of TV. I will
Yeah.
also direct people towards an episode of Mr. Belvedere where Mr. Belvedere discourages a teenager from being gay, and it's the weirdest fucking thing in the world
Oh,
to watch
no.
because you're like, wait, he's like telling him, he's like, no, I don't think you're actually gay. And the kid's like, you're right, Mr. Belvedere, thanks. And it
Oh
is
my God.
such a weird piece of media where you're like, who is this for? Who wrote this? Why does this exist? Made all the more complicated by the fact that the actor who played Mr. Belvedere was himself a very closeted gay man.
Oh, wow. Dang. Those
Yeah.
are some interesting, like, two sides of a possible coin there for great episodes. That's fantastic. The last thing I'll ask you about your show, because you said you've done 200 or so episodes at this point.
Yeah.
When did you start your podcast? All again, asking you things I could have just looked up myself.
I think we started in 2018.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing about your show. Gayest episode ever. I'm gonna have a link in the show notes for people to go to your podcast and just start diving in. Is there anything else that you want to share about yourself, podcast related or not, before we continue?
So my video game stuff, that's not good phrasing. Since I've been online, I've been like writing about video games or doing stuff about video games, and that currently is taking the form of I call it a website because I don't want to just call it a blog. It's a blog. I made like an old fashioned blog that is called Thrilling Tales of Old Video Games. And I just do deep dives about historical stuff from like usually 8-bit to 16-bit era stuff, just
Mm,
trying to unpack stuff. I just put one up this morning about Barbarella and Metroid and
whoa.
how the motif of like that thing in a video game where you don't know you're playing as a girl character until the end of the game when she's like, "Oh, that turns out I was a girl the entire time,"
Yeah.
might sort of go back to Barbarella, and I just think that kind of stuff is super interesting.
Mm,
But also, I used to have a different podcast that I technically didn't end, but some people who listen to this might know. It's called Singing Mountain. It's a video game music podcast that I did like for a few years. There's like more than 100 episodes,
whoa.
and so there's some people who are video game podcast people who know me from that who don't listen to the TV podcast.
Oh my gosh, that's incredible. Just Singing Mountain is the title you said?
Mhm.
Wow. Gosh, we got some like good stuff to dive into. So we've got gayest episode ever, Singing Mountain, and Thrilling Tales from Old Video Games, which is your website.
Yep.
Website. We're not describing it as a blog, whether or not it's exactly what it is. That's really exciting. I'll include links to all three of those in the show notes. Thank you so much for sharing about yourself before we pop in. Speaking of which, we're gonna get to your history with video games in general, but I would love if you introduce the game you've brought on for today's main event later and call me by your game.
The name of the video game that I'm bringing on today is Trials of Mana, which is maybe better known to a lot of people as Seiken Densetsu 3, but is informally known as Secret of Mana 2. It's really complicated.
Yes.
But the Wikipedia page today points you towards Trials of Mana, which I think
Yes.
is actually also Mana, but I always have pronounced it Mana. I listened to your episode with Nadia, and she
Yeah.
consistently called it Mana every time. I'm like, I know that's right, but my stupid American brain is like Mana, M-A-N-A, Mana. That's how you say it. Secret of Mana 2.
I do the same thing with that exact word or words that like Ocarina of Time is one of my favorite games, and I've heard myself on podcasts say Ocarina.
Yeah.
It's our brains will do what they'll do. But
Mhm.
I'm so excited to hear from you about that game in our main event later. Let's get into your history with video games in general. Do you remember some of your earliest memories of taking an interest in games?
Yes. When I was in first grade, so this is 1988, I think, we got a Nintendo for Christmas, and I initially hated it because the only game we had was Super Mario Brothers, and I was bad at it
Oh,
because I did not have the dexterity to keep Mario from falling in a hole constantly. But I kept trying with it, and eventually did beat it, but still had like a adversarial relationship with it because I thought it was so mean. But then we got Mario 2, which is a much easier play, and there are fewer holes. and you can also play as the princess, and that really sold me on Mario. And from then on, I was like, I think I'm going to do this for the rest of my life, and I have.
Wow. Um, Super Mario Brothers 2. I also had such a love for that game growing up, and I feel like it injected, like I love one, but I
Mhm.
felt like two injected, even though, I mean, been said a million times. It's a reskin of a different game, called Doki Doki Panic, but I feel like it injected so much personality in the series that stuck. And that was one thing that like I remember loving about it as a kid. So, Toadstool was like your go-to character.
Yes, which I didn't realize at the time is because she's basically the beginner character because
Yeah.
it's a lot
Oh,
easier to
okay.
time jumps because like it's easier to control where you land and not fall in the hole with her. And I was like, oh, that was like the Game Genie version of playing this game. Oh, that's funny. But I didn't think about it that way. I just knew I always was the kid who wanted to play as the female characters, like in Street Fighter. I
Yeah.
was like Chun-Li, obviously, Mortal Kombat. I am Sonya, obviously, and only kind of stopped doing that as I got older, actually. But I just thought it was cool when female characters got to do something.
Totally. Especially, I mean, in so much media, but especially video games, like the female video game characters or protagonist or playable characters are severely outnumbered. I was actually doing research for the game we're going to talk about a little later, and something that people kept that I kept seeing expressed online was an appreciation that there are protagonists in this game, and not just like, oh, you're the main character and you're like first playable partner is a female character, but that this one has other options for you.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's so cool. You got this Nintendo. Were you sharing this with people? Was this like your Nintendo?
It was my brother's Nintendo, and it very quickly became my Nintendo as he just sort of didn't latch onto it as strongly as I did. So I sort of, yeah, just snuck in there and claimed it.
Nice. That's very fortunate. Me and my sister had such different interests growing up that like I never it was very rare for one of us to get like a shared gift that like one of us that we both might be interested in, but only ended up with one of us. So,
Mm.
uh, good going for you. Do you remember other early games on that console, or even another one that helped sort of like enrich that appreciation for games?
So I was always like, I have weird brand loyalty when it comes to companies. So I just bought Nintendo products
Hmm.
and did buy some non-Nintendo games, like some of the Capcom, like Disney adventures that came out. Were platformer games,
Oh
which are pretty
yeah.
good. And then the original Final Fantasy for NES, and um, gosh, what the hell else? We had like 30 games by the time we were done with the Nintendo.
Wow.
And then I got a Super Nintendo, and that really was mine from the beginning. And that just kind of cemented everything that was forming about like video games might be a thing I like. I really love that system. And that is why the game I picked comes from that system because that is sort of my go-to for like this is what a video game should look and feel like today.
Yes. And when you say that, are you talking about like classic JRPGs from the SNES era or just games in general?
Games in general. So I was a
Mhm.
platformer, fighting game person, and RPG person, and those all had great runs on the Super Nintendo. And more than anything, as like time went on, I really got into JRPGs, and the ones that came out for the end of that system, I think, are some of the most beautiful pixel art we got, especially because we sort of stopped getting pixel art as frequently when the next generation of systems came out. And I think any video game on any system can look good, but those pixel art graphics in this game and like other Squaresoft games that came out, like they're just so good and they are the aesthetic that I'm like yearning for constantly.
Yes, that's something that I can relate to quite strongly, having not grown up with a Super Nintendo. I adore it. It was a console that my friend had growing up, and so because I was like a original Nintendo to N64 kid
Mhm.
somehow, I mean I know how, but we don't need to dive into it on your episode. I've already made this about myself enough. I would go over there and see him turn on Final Fantasy VI. I would see him turn on Super Mario RPG or other JRPGs of that era. And like there was that nostalgia from just seeing those images stays with me today. Uh, no, uh, you said you played the original Final Fantasy, and I know we're getting into like a little JRPG heavy talk right now. Um, but what was like your other games on the system that you played JRPG wise, or was there like a gateway one outside of Final Fantasy one?
So I rented the first Dragon Quest, which was called Dragon Warrior on the NES, and I wasn't smart enough to figure out, like, I didn't understand what the leveling up system was because I'd never
Mm.
played a RPG before. So that was a pass for me. And then Nintendo Power sent out a massive strategy guide for Final Fantasy in lieu of a regular issue for 1 month.
Oh
So it's like, here's
wow.
how to play the entire game. I'm like, okay. So I bought the game, and with that guide's help, I could get through it. And then it was like, oh, this is good, but didn't really play that many RPGs on regular Nintendo. I think by that time I knew Super Nintendo was coming, and the game that we now call Final Fantasy IV was coming. And I was like, that, give me that.
Yeah.
And then played a bunch of other stuff, but like I was always going back to RPGs and SquareSoft RPGs in particular. So everyone you'd imagine, like Chrono Trigger and the original Secret of Mana and everything. Yeah.
Yeah. That's great. Two was like, or Final Fantasy 2/4 was also like my gateway to really the genre outside of the original Pokemon games,
Right.
personally. So you were a big Super Nintendo head. Did you get into handhelds ever?
Yeah, we had a Game Boy, and we just had regular Game Boy, and I didn't have anything else until Game Boy Advance came out.
Okay, gotcha. Which, that was probably really nice for you because there's a ton of SNES ports on that bad boy.
Yeah, it was very nostalgic because I was in college, and I'm like, am I still gonna play video games? And that came out, and I'm like, I guess I am.
Yeah, absolutely. Uh, that's fantastic. And of course, launch title, your beloved Super Mario Brothers 2 was on there.
Talking way too much.
Yeah, those voices are pretty tough at this day and age.
Mm.
Lots of that. Okay, so I would love to hear from you about other meaningful games after this era for you, and what your journey was like. Did you jump right to the Nintendo 64? I would love to hear.
I got a Nintendo 64, I think probably 96. So like I guess pretty early on when it
Yeah.
was happening, and liked Mario 64, but it wasn't the same because I think my brain had already set for like, this is what feels right to me.
Mm-hmm.
And polygons never quite did it for me the way like really good pixel art did. I felt like they had just figured out how to use pixel art to convey so much, and then it went away for a while, and it
Yeah.
took us a while to get back to it. So I played through all of the major Nintendo games that came out on Nintendo 64, and I liked it, but I missed what I was missing, and that's honestly still what I'm searching out. So I'll be brave and try something else, but I always go back to the familiar.
Totally. Did that cause you at all to be interested in and I know there was still a ton of polygon and 3D design in the PlayStation RPGs, but did you ever test any of those out? Were you interested?
I got a PlayStation eventually to play Legend of Mana, which is the
Gotcha.
next game in this series, and then retroactively went back and played Final Fantasy VII, and I didn't like it, and I've never liked it, and
Wow.
I didn't finish it. I got like to the last disc, and I'm like, I'm good.
Yeah.
But like played like Chrono Cross. I really liked Final Fantasy Tactics, but that's
Hmm.
pixel art and not polygons.
Yes.
And whenever Final Fantasy goes back to being what it used to be, I always like it more, but I'm not so much of a millennial that I'm insisting on it has to be that. Otherwise, I'm out. I realize I have to try to adapt. But that was actually the last non-Nintendo system I bought. By the time I got a GameCube in college, and then Wii U, and now Switch, and I'm such a simp for Nintendo. It's really ridiculous and sad how like they tricked me into thinking I can only buy their products.
Yes, the console wars truly worked on you. That's great.
Yeah.
Um, okay, so I mean, you named like consoles I would have probably asked you about, but in this, what I like to hear from people on occasion is, especially people who've been gaming seemingly your entire life. Have you ever had a big lull or a dark period, as I like to call it, where you're not playing games at all, or much less than you have?
Yeah, I'm in one right now. It is actually, I just had really shit luck with latching onto video games
Yeah.
lately, where like a lot of stuff comes out. I'm like, oh, that's probably gonna be for me. I liked Triangle Strategy or Triangle
Yes.
Story. I can't remember what it's called. That one I did, but I like Final Fantasy Tactics, so of course I like that. And I beat that one. But there's been a lot of flashy games that have come out in the last few years that I just never latched onto and gave up. I have played through Breath of the Wild twice and have given up. I'm just like, I don't care.
Yeah.
It doesn't grab me because I think A Link to the Past is what Zelda is for me, and Breath of the Wild is a beautiful game. It's just a different beast than what I'm looking for. So when they
Yes.
come back and do another Link to the Past like they did a few years ago, I'll play that. But I just have to accept that a lot of things aren't for me. Have you played Sea of Stars at all?
No.
Yeah.
But I think I saw you chatting about it on Discord a bit.
Yeah, I hate it. I really, really don't like it in the way. There's actually a pretty good comparison for the game we're talking about in this episode. So we never got this game in America in the
Yes.
16-bit era. We got Secret of Evermore instead, which was produced by Americans,
Yes.
and it's a Secret of Mana style game that I played and beat, but it didn't ever feel right because like this is not. It's missing something that I guess might just be an authentically Japanese vibe that they can make over there and we can't reproduce in America. But I never loved that the way I love this game or the previous game. And similarly, Sea of Stars, it's sort of like Chrono Trigger, but it's not really.
Yeah.
And a lot of people were like, it's like the spiritual sequel to Chrono Trigger that we never really got. And the gameplay is great, but like the vibe is just off for me, and like this is not clicking, and I'm not gonna play it anymore.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
one that I coming into the year was like, oh, this is on my top list of anticipated games. And like, I don't know what happened, but when it came out, I just like, it's not like I had heard a lot because I've heard people express similar things to you as well, and then other people who've like really enjoyed it. But for whatever reason, I didn't have the urgency to play it when it came out that I had like I don't know 8 9 months before.
Right.
So it's to you it feels like the vibe is off. But is there anything else that you can point to that you're like this is bumping for you on that game?
Um, okay, so this also applies to what we're talking about today. So when you play Seiken Densetsu 3, or whatever the hell you're going to call it, you get to your opening screen when you start a new game, and you have to pick a party of 3 out of 6 characters.
Okay.
And I sort of knew a little bit about the characters leading into it, and I really agonized over which ones to pick because I liked all of them, and you don't get to see the storylines of the people you don't pick. And I
Oh.
was like, oh, this is like kind of torturous. Like it kind of changes the game. Like you get a different boss and a different path depending on who
Hmm.
you pick. And when you start Sea of Stars, it tells you like you can pick the boy character or the girl character. It doesn't matter which one you pick. And I was
Huh.
like, why, why why would you tell me that? Like, it's really weird to find that there's no stakes in either character. And the characters, once I started playing the game, are not written particularly
Yeah.
with personality like the ones in this game are. And it's just not what I'm looking for, turns out.
Totally.
No.
Yeah. That's like one of my good friends and past guests of the show, Mike Steele, who actually talked for the longest episode of this podcast ever, 2.5 hours
Oh,
about
wow.
Final Fantasy VI.
Yeah, I get it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
probably could have done more, honestly, for him. But he's the person I think of who was like when it came out, he was so excited and it disappointed him in similar ways that you're expressing as well. So that's too bad. I think it's still something I would give a shot. But I'm not like, oh, I need to play this before the end of the year, sort of feeling anymore.
The play mechanics are excellent. I can't fault the play mechanics. It's
Yeah.
everything else that doesn't come together for me, which it turns out
Okay.
is very important for me in a game experience.
Yeah, I had a similar sort of like revelation in the last couple years where I which this is gonna it might sound stupid, but I didn't realize how much story mattered to me in video
Yeah.
games. Certain types of games. Like I could play a Mario game. I'm not gonna probably be overly concerned, but I realized when looking at the Legend of Zelda series that for me, one of the top factors was how much do I connect or enjoy a story
Mhm.
and yeah, so it sounds like I could be in a similar situation as you with this game. Well, I got a couple more questions for you about your history with video games. The first of which is that obviously Sea of Stars has come and passed for you. Is there a game on the horizon, whether it's the rest of this remainder of this year or later or next year, that you are looking forward to?
This is such a like this is the like most slam dunk answer ever. Super Mario Brothers Wonder. Like I see
All
this game and I'm like,
right.
this is for me, especially because I was someone who loved Mario 2 a lot. And in
Yeah.
some ways this seems like a return to that, where they're like, yeah, let's make like multiple playable characters and it's weird and colorful in a way that like the new Super Mario Brothers games have it. I'm just like on fire for this game in a way that I haven't felt in a long time. I'll be surprised if I don't like it. I'll probably like it. Nintendo usually works for me, so
Yeah, I've
yeah.
been pretty excited about it since the trailer. Like this isn't founded in anything substantive, but I like how strange it appears, and not just for, being quirky and different, but they're little, and I've kind of stayed away from most of the information about the game because I'm just gonna go for it. But
Mhm.
there's so much about it that seems new and refreshing and fun, and yeah, can't wait for that game.
Yeah, like I could not imagine a more ideal game for me.
Yes. Um, Last question for you is before we go to break, is there any game in, your history of gaming that you would just be so bummed if you didn't get to shout out?
I guess I would say, given the time of year we're recording this, this is gonna run before Halloween, yeah?
Yes.
Yeah. Darkstalkers is such a
Oh,
weird little baby in Capcom that I don't think Capcom loves enough, but I love it a lot. And it has some of the best design I've ever seen in a video game. Like the
yeah.
animation and just like the design of these characters is iconic in a way that bums me out because we'll probably never see them done again in that like hand drawn style because it's just not what people are looking for. They're probably looking for like a Street Fighter 5 or 6 style
Yeah.
um, like setup if we ever get another Darkstalkers. But those freaky fighting monsters, I love them so much.
What did that come out for? Was that a Saturn game or Genesis?
It Saturn, so it was arcades. So it was 3 different installments in the arcades, and then ports on like whatever PlayStation on, and that's it. And now it exists whenever they put those characters in like other games like Marvel vs. Capcom, but
Oh,
it's just kind of in a weird limbo. And I wish it would come back because um, it allegedly almost did, and they changed their mind about it, which is a bummer. But there's a character in Street Fighter 5 named Fang.
mhm.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
I think so.
He's like a tall, skinny guy who uses poison, and
Yes.
he's really weird looking. And a lot of people think that that was a repurposed Darkstalkers design. Like they were
Oh.
working on some new Darkstalker stuff, and when they were told, "Nope, we're not going to make that game," they repurposed him as a Street Fighter character.
Oh, wow.
Mhm.
Gosh, what a great pick. You had mentioned that, like, you were really into fighting games, so I'm glad that we got to hear you really shout one out. That's great. Well, Drew, we're gonna go ahead and take a quick break before we come back and talk about all things Trials of Mana, Seiken Densetsu 3. So I'll see you on the other side. Welcome back to Call Me by Your Game. It is, of course, I, your host, Connor McCabe, here with Drew Mackie. Drew, welcome back.
Hello.
We are going to finally get into the game you've brought on for the main event today, Trials of Mana, Seiken Densetsu 3. And like I told you before, I'm just going to read some basic history and context about this game to get us into it. But at any time, if you want to jump in to help set the table, you got the green light, pal. All right, here we go. So, Trials of Mana, also known by its Japanese title Seiken Densetsu 3, is a 1995 action RPG developed and published by Square for the Super Famicom. It's the sequel to the 1993 game Secret of Mana, and is the third installment in the series. Set in a high fantasy world, the game follows 3 heroes as they attempt to claim the legendary Mana Sword and prevent the Benevodons from being unleashed and destroying the world. And when we say three main characters, I'm breaking from the script here. We're referring to the three characters you can choose from the six, correct?
Yes, like you start out with that opening screen, and you may have no information, so you might be basing these just on looks and like what
Yes.
you perceive their sort of attack style to be.
Yes. Yeah, it's not like it gives you a little like rundown as you like hover over a character. Um like we said, there are six possible main characters with three main plot lines as well. Each has their own storyline and allows two players to play simultaneously. Trials of Mana builds on the gameplay of its predecessors with a predecessor with multiple enhancements, including the use of a time progression system with transitions from day to night and weekday to weekday in game time. I'm learning about that right now, just reading that from this Wikipedia entry that I'm pulling from. That's really cool. It also had a wide range of character classes to choose from, which provides each character with an exclusive set of skills and status progression. The game was designed by series creator Koichi Ishii, directed by veteran Square designer Hiromichi Tanaka, and produced by Tetsuhisa Surozono. Artworks produced by manga and anime artist Nobutaro Yuki, and while the music was composed by Secret of Mana composer Hiroki Kikuta. Although the game was designed or was published only in Japan, English-speaking players had been able to play this game due to an unofficial English fan translation released in 1999. There's so much that I would be asking you about here, but I'm sure we're going to get into it in your time with the game. So I'm pocketing a few questions, Drew.
Yeah.
This game received considerable acclaim from reviewers who praised the graphics as among the best ever made for the Super Famicom and the gameplay as an improved version of its predecessors. The plot received mixed reviews by critics who found the overlapping stories to be interesting and to enhance replayability, but the characters and plotline themselves, according to the critics, to be flat and cliched. More on that later. We'll have to hear from Drew.
Mhm.
Overall, the game is considered to be a classic of the system. In June 2017, the game was included in the Seiken Densetsu collection release for the Nintendo Switch in Japan, and it also came out in 2019 in North America in the PAL region as Collection of Mana, with this game titled Trials of Mana. And a 3D remake of the same name was announced alongside it and released worldwide in April 2020 for Windows, Switch, and PS4. Drew, that was a lot of information that I just threw out there.
Mhm.
As far as setting the table, is there anything else we should get into before we talk about your history with the game?
I'll talk about the characters and the way they set
Cool.
up the six characters in opposition to each other. So this is something I knew because I was a big reader of gaming magazines in the 90s, which were plentiful. There was like 8 different gaming magazines at my local grocery store. I grew up in a small town in Central California, so I'm not even like pulling like big city like numbers in terms of like what sort of stuff is available. But you are injected into the beginning of the story and you pick 6 different characters. You are shown 6 different characters, and a pair of each of them is at war with each other. So you have the
Oh,
grass kingdoms at war with the snow kingdom, the desert kingdoms at war with the holy city, which is a really awkward thing when you think about the visual optics of what it means for a desert city to be at war with the holy city.
truly.
And then no wait, desert city is at war with mountain city, I think. Maybe I screwed that up. And then Beast Kingdom is at war with. There's the sixth one, and the 6 characters you get are a really hunky guy with a sword, a ninja who has 2 knives, and then a beast boy who fights with claws, but at night he
Yes.
turns into a werewolf. So I'm like, that is who I'm picking because
Yes.
werewolf. And
Kevin.
then Kevin, he's my by far my favorite. A sexy girl who casts magic, a really cute girl who casts white magic, and a very stern looking Amazon who was mysterious. And I'm like, her, I want to know what her deal is.
Yeah.
And then I had one more spot remaining, and I was absolutely tortured over which of the 4 remaining characters I would pick, knowing full well that when I finished the game, I would just play it again with the other 3 immediately afterwards.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Gosh. Yeah, that we were talking about this a little bit earlier with, getting into the Sea of Stars talk, but man, that's a tough choice. Unlike, something modern like Octopath Traveler where you eventually get every character, that's a tough decision.
Mhm.
So do you remember, I mean, no, we're getting into this a little bit, but you went with Kevin, you went with Amazon Girl.
Reese, and then the last one was Hawkeye, who's Ninja, because Ninja and Amazon Girl are at war with each other, and the game is more entertaining when you put characters who fight with each other in the same party,
Oh,
because then they interact with each other in a way other characters wouldn't. The level of interaction is pretty limited. I mean, it doesn't affect the game that much, but it's an added flavor if you know how to
okay.
balance your party correctly. Yeah.
Very cool. All
Hmm.
right. Well, let's get into this. I'd love to know how you discovered the game. I think you was that to do with reading the gaming magazines?
Yeah, so I
Yes.
love Secret of Mana like passionately. I love Final Fantasy and I love Zelda, and this felt like a nice fusion between the two. And so when I learned there was a sequel, I was very excited. And then eventually they're like, "Oh, it's not coming out here," and I was like, "What the fuck? How is this happening?" I'd not experienced a whole lot of bad stuff because I'm like maybe 12 when that
Yeah.
happened, and I don't think like a show I really loved had ever been canceled or anything like that. Where I'm just like, the world is unfair and horrible. But
Yeah.
it was really confusing for me to be like, oh, I guess I'm just never gonna play this thing that seems like it's like made specifically for me.
Yeah.
That is a bummer. And also, it sort of happened the same time I was transitioning from uh, into high school, which was a rough transition for me.
Mm.
So it was a real, it was like the icing on the cake, but the cake is poison, you know?
Yes. Yeah. When
Yeah.
it rains, it pours, sort of thing.
When it rains, it pours shit. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
So cool. So you discovered it. It wasn't, in the cards for you. How did you come to play it in the first place after this blow you were dealt?
So the internet was pretty new to me, and I was learning about like different fan communities for people who
Yeah.
love the video games I like, and there were tutorials about like, if you want to play the sequel to Secret of Mana, here's how you do it. And I ended up going into one of the advertisements they used to have at the back of, like, I think this one was in Die Hard Game Fan, which is a magazine I used to read back in the day, and they would have import shops where you
Oh,
could
cool.
buy things that had not come officially to America, and they would explain how to. They would give you the equipment to play these cartridges that wouldn't necessarily fit into your American systems on an American system. And it took some doing, but this is what I got for Christmas. Even though I basically just ordered it myself, this is what I got from Santa
Yes.
that year, which was the Japanese cartridge and then a little plastic converter that allowed me to put it into my Super Nintendo and play it in Japanese, which I did not speak and still don't speak. So when I talk about, it's more fun to put characters who fight amongst each other in the same party. I am basing that on having played the fan translation like when I was in college,
Sure.
but and then I did it again when I moved to LA like maybe a decade ago. But I had this really weird experience of like, okay, so I have the game here in my house. I'm gonna play it, but I don't really know what's going on
Yeah.
because I don't speak Japanese. So I'm just getting like all this text is flying by. I'm like, I don't know what anyone's saying. So I'm just sort of going on online guides and trial and error to figure out how to play through this game. And I did okay. And I learned some basic Japanese, like menu commands that are easy to,
Mhm.
like, oh, that's yes, that's no. This is what save looks like. I think I'm good to go. And I still kind of remember what those look like. But I think one of the reasons I really latch onto this as the pinnacle of visual storytelling from the 16-bit era is that I didn't have the text to bolster my playthrough of it at the time. So that review said that like the characters were like cliche.
Sure. Yeah.
I didn't know that at the time. I am just watching the text fly by, and since it's 16-bit, the characters are pretty well animated, so I can see how they're reacting to something. And I'm like, oh, something bad has happened now because the music went from triumphant to sad.
Yeah.
And I don't know what happened. All of a sudden, like, oh, this character just fell down and they're flashing, which is 16-bit RPG for like, oh, they're dead.
Yes.
They're gone now. I was like, oh, okay, they died. I don't know why. I will just continue to experience this game on the most abstract level possible, but
Yes.
also I got a really good feel for the mechanics because there was kind of is like mechanics, sound, and visuals, and there's no other element that I'm really experiencing of this. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
You must have like really been enjoying what you were able to I guess interpret or experience if because that's a barrier of entry obviously, but you stuck with it. Did you end up playing this thing all the way through, or is it like you tried your best, or
Yeah, the guides online were good enough that I eventually took a long time, and there was some frustration, honestly. But I made my way through and beat the game, and then played it through again with the other three characters to see what I was missing, and then played through. There's three different bosses you can get, and I picked, I think, the last remaining kid that I hadn't picked before to get the last boss. So I played through all three different versions of the story and experienced it just in like such a weird way.
yeah?
But also high school was not great for me because I got sent to an all guys Catholic school that was like an hour away from where I lived.
Oh
So like
wow.
I was waking up early and then like the people I was going to school with were far away from me. So it wasn't really uh the social interaction that I thought I was going to get out of high school because I
Yeah.
was so far away. And I think my frustration with like, oh God, high school sucks is what gave me the momentum to like push through this very difficult
Mm,
abstract gameplay experience as a way of like escaping like the sadness of like the rest of my life wasn't going so well either. But it
totally.
was actually sort of rewarding in the end to be like, oh, I fucking did it. And then eventually I transferred out of high school and my life turned out to be a lot better.
Oh, I'm glad you were able to do that. That stinks.
Yeah.
And yeah, it makes sense that you're like, hey, like this is at least better than that, what I've
Mhm.
got going on at school. I can't imagine like, yeah, I mean, let alone going to a school that it sounds like you didn't want to go to, that was like, it's not like yeah, like you were getting to basically. You didn't live in the same neighborhoods as these other kids. Even if you maybe were making friends, like it's not like you could keep them that well socially.
No, and I grew up in the country anyway. So like even in the town I did live in, we didn't live in city limits. I lived kind of in the boonies. So
Yeah.
this was like probably like the climax of using video games as a means to like deal with the fact that like I'm sort of isolated.
Yeah.
Um, which is probably why I played through this game again when I moved to Los Angeles and was like, well, I live in Los Angeles now. I don't know anyone. I'm going to go back to this comforting thing and give it another shot.
Yeah, in a like similar but different situation of that isolation. Is that what you were getting to?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
just as a comfort thing until I learned how to live in this city and like navigate the city, which was honestly easier than high school.
Good. I'm glad that it got a little easier.
Yeah.
Um, well, that's amazing. I would love to just dig in a little bit to like, you using these guides to play the game.
Mhm.
Was this something that you would like have up on a computer? Were you printing out old game facts? What was the method here?
I don't know that if GameFAQs existed as a website.
Yeah.
I don't know if I was on it necessarily because this was WebRing level internet where it was on like people's like GeoCities pages that were donated
Okay.
to like Squaresoft video games or something like that. Um, and sometimes those facts would be like orange text on a blue background, like something that someone made themselves without the slightest hint of like web design.
Yeah.
And I was using those and just sort of skipping around. I was really bad. Like my internet research skills basically didn't exist at that point. So it very well could be that I just hadn't found GameFAQs yet, but I wasn't even accessing them through GameFAQs. But yeah, basically that and message boards and like I'm in this town. It's this color. I don't know how to describe the characters that are in the town name, but I feel like everyone is sad, and there's like a blue thing that's angry at me. What do I do? And someone
Yeah.
would be like, "Here's what you do." I'm like, "Oh, thank you, internet, thank you, strange internet person," and have never been able to locate those message boards or websites that I was interacting with, but I'm very grateful for those people that helped me through it.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure it took a bit of patience on your end too to like there was like multiple layers of you having to figure out what you were doing and find it
Mhm.
through this help. So I'm sure it took a lot of patience. I would love to know, there's a few more things I want to ask you. Before we dive into more of the like context and like where you played it and stuff, were there other aspects of the game, whether it be this first couple run throughs you had or something or from like a future playthrough? aspects of the game that you really enjoyed or that still stick out to you?
Yes, like on the most simplistic level, the fact that like I was like didn't know how to like exist in high school when it came out, I was jealous of the fact that the characters made friends so easily. Of
Yeah.
being like, oh, let's travel together. Like, okay, like we don't know each other, but okay, let's just be friends. Like, okay, I was like, they're doing it really well, and I can't figure out how to do that in life. But that's always an RPG thing. Um, I think the thing I would want to direct everyone to if they want to watch their playthrough of this game is that you have like a prologue that centers on your character solo, and you find out like whatever trauma is happening to them that sets them out on a quest to
Mm,
walk around the entire world and like stop the world from being garbage. And when you finish your opening prologue, you get a credits roll, and you get this theme song by Hiroki Kikuta called Meridian Child. I don't know what that means. None of the song tracks have none of them mean anything to me really, but it's like it's very cinematic in a way that was like the height of sophistication for video games when it came out, and it was about to get a lot better because of CD-based systems that were shortly to debut. But it is a very stirring song, and you see your character get on a ship, and they all go to a central town, and all six characters end up. I think maybe one character goes somewhere else. They all end up in a central place, and none of them know what they're doing there, and they're trying to figure out how their individual quests are going. And then slowly, your three characters end up tacking onto each other, and it's just a really lovely sequence to the point that I actually went through and played all the different prologues the first time through because I just wanted to see them all end up in the same place.
yeah.
It's very charming in a way that is unique to the process of an RPG party forming, where it's like heartwarming and inspiring, and it's everything I like about video games.
Yeah. That's great. And thankfully no shortage of like RPGs specifically that have that sort of thing of a, group of people from around the world or whatever banding together to uh like you said, make the world not crap.
Mhm.
That's fantastic. I've listened to about the music. I've listened to plenty of Secret of Mana music, whether it's like Super Nintendo like 3 hour music loop to like do work at home, but I'm sure that this soundtrack is amazing too. So this is more of a note for myself than an observation, but I need to put that on my list the next time I'm working at my computer. Now, what I would like to know about is I would love, as we get into a little bit of the context, which you've thankfully like been sprinkling in for us, I would love to do a little bit of scene painting for like what your setup was like or the room that you played this game originally, if you don't mind us walking through that.
So I grew up in a house in the country, L-shaped California style ranch home. I and my brother have bedrooms on the second story, which is above the garage, and it's literally just like bedrooms, bathroom, and then a small like common room where
Yeah.
there is a like crappy square color TV that no one else wanted, and it's existing above like the Windows computer that was one of the first computers we ever had, and all video games until I think I got a PlayStation um, a few years later were played above the family computer
Oh,
in a
wow.
TV that was otherwise reserved for watching cartoons or like The Simpsons.
Wow. So that being above the computer
Mhm.
was like imagine so many kids of that era like sitting on the ground and playing this. Were you still able to do that? Were you standing up?
No, we were on these uncomfortable wooden chairs that really sucked to sit in for more than an hour. It was just like all the furniture that like no one else wanted had made its way up to this common area, and I love video games enough that I withstood those incredibly uncomfortable computer chairs to play through. It was just not an ideal experience. I didn't know there was another way to do it until I started noticing like other people's setups, and I was like, oh, this is much better. Like
Yeah.
sitting on the floor is awesome, and also bigger TVs exist. It took a while for my family to get hip to that.
Yes, that was not part of a universal part of a gaming experience. That's great. Would you, being this like common room, was this a place that you would like spend a lot of time? Would you have snacks? Do you remember were there windows? I'd love to know.
The windows were the bathroom, the two bedrooms. There was no windows to this room. It was
Oh,
literally
really?
just three doors and then the stairs going down and then the TV with my neck craned up.
Oh my
And
gosh.
people would come through and just sort of ignore what I was doing because there was a real lack of understanding. I mean, like I'm the only one that kept up with video games, and they the rest of the family really has never understood what I got out of video games. And I'm
Hmm.
just like, oh, this one, I really can't explain it to you. Either you get it or you don't. But I think they really thought like I was wasting my time.
Hmm.
And I really think it was time well spent. And we're never going to come to common ground on that.
Yeah. I think that's something that a lot of people, whether it be, in your situation where it seems like no one understood, um, many of us, I feel like, have gone through that of like, this is a waste of time. Like, what are you doing? And then, here you are making it like you write about games. Like, and even if you didn't,
Hmm.
not time poorly spent. You don't have to justify it by like, oh, it's a part of my career. But I'm sorry that was something you felt and that you were going through. As far as the context, is there anything else about that time that you would like to dig into or that you remember, whether it be broad or specific?
Um, hmm. I'm trying to think how to answer this question.
And were you saying that this was the time where you had, gone to the Catholic high school an hour away?
Yeah. So
Dang.
I went to a K through 8,
Hmm.
which so I didn't go to a regular middle school. It was like a really small Catholic school,
Mm.
and like my graduating 8th grade class, I think was like 17 kids, 18 kids.
Wow.
It was not very big, and a lot of us had been together since we were really young. So
Yes.
like I never had to really deal with new people because I was just had been there forever, and then got sent to a better school far away because my parents thought it was a good idea. It really was not,
Yeah.
and just had to be confronted for the first time of like, oh, I didn't learn basic social necessities. I've never had to like do the work of like introducing myself and making friends, so I just
Mm.
sort of didn't exist in the world of that high school.
Yeah.
And had to figure that out and sort of failed to figure that out, and eventually got to go to the public school that was like a 10-minute drive from my house, and was also much better for me because it had girls. And if anyone was going to listen to me when I was a teenager, it was going to be girls and not other teenage boys, it turns out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm really glad that you eventually got to do that. Was that like, did you spend a year at this other high school, the first one or two? So you
Mm.
basically split up high school in that way.
Yeah, and then I got to be the new kid at my second high school, and I used it to my advantage because I'd already been through a bad experience. So I was like, I know how to do it right, and fixed all the mistakes I made the first time around. It was a much better experience.
Oh my gosh, I'm so glad. But I'm also, really glad that you had this game during that, first couple years at bummer time.
Yeah,
we Go ahead,
actually, I
sorry.
think I stopped playing video games for the second half of high school because I actually had a social life at that point and was like going on dates and stuff.
Yeah.
So like, video games, who needs this? And then it took a long time. I think I did a lot of emulation my freshman year of college, and
Yeah.
then I bought a Game Boy Advance the next year and have continued to do it ever since. But like, I think probably if there was any time when I put some distance between myself and video games, it would have been the last half of high school, like leading up to like 2000.
Wow,
So
interesting. Um, That's amazing. I've really enjoyed hearing from you and learning more about you, both, in the context of this game, but outside of that, from this particular time in your life. Before we move to the end of the show and do a couple post-show segments, is there anything you haven't got to share about this game or the time you played it? And if not, would you like to wrap up whatever place this did hold for you?
you mentioned there's the time change mechanic in this game.
Yes.
So, it is one of the things I still think about if I'm on a plane, actually. So, like in Secret of Mana and this game, you don't have an airship, you ride a flying dragon, which is
All
awesome.
right.
And in the Secret of Mana, it's just like regular mode 7, like any sort of airship. And it's like the airship in Final Fantasy 6, basically.
Yeah.
But in this game, it cycles from day to night, and you can see little lights go on in the little villages below. And
Oh.
it is such a small detail that I love so much. But like if I'm flying into back into like the Burbank airport at the right time of day, and it's the time of day when people start turning the lights on in the house and you're close enough that you can see them, it makes me think of Seiken Densetsu 3 every single time,
Oh my
because I
gosh.
always was so charmed by that and be like, oh, it's the end of the day for these people. The people are going home for the end of the day. It's this wonderful, cozy feeling. And turns out you get to experience that at Burbank Airport too.
Yeah. Thank you, Bob Hope Airport, for that sensation. That's really
Do you know they
uh
changed the name? They don't call it that anymore.
oh, they don't?
They took down all the Bob Hope signing. Now it says Burbank Airport. I don't know why they changed it, but the last time I flew in, there is no signage that says Bob Hope Airport anymore.
Oh my
I
goodness.
I don't know what happened.
I'm not like I don't think I could tell you much about Bob Hope, nor am I a stan, but like that's too bad. Like that was like kind of a distinct feature of it.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah.
But I probably will be thinking about that the next time I fly in around who knows, sunset or whatever, and I see the same thing. Um, well, great. Would you like to just wrap up put a bow on whatever place this held for you?
Let's put the bow in it.
Awesome. Great. Well, Drew, thank you so much for bringing this game on and talking about it. It's been so much fun because I'm, incredibly familiar with the first one, but not this. So this was a privilege. I'll go ahead and lead us into our two post-show segments. The first of which is the Fact Me by Your Game segment, where I'm just going to share a couple of fun facts with you about this game, which you might already even know. The first of which, I've got two of these today. I have titled Development Team Party Member Shuffle. Now, production on this game began in 1993, which included a lengthy period of trial and error where several prototype designs of this game were made and then scrapped. The team also had difficulties keeping team members, as many were brought on to other Super Famicom titles like Chrono Trigger and Romancing Saga for finishing touches. This I always wonder, this is me, and I'm not editorializing, but I'm making an observation here where watching video for this game and many games of this style in this era, there's so much that visually that is so reminiscent of each other. And this game in particular, I was seeing like areas or certain effects like a fog effect that I was like, oh my gosh, that is reminds me so much of Chrono Trigger or Final Fantasy VI. So it was no surprise to me that there was crossover in development team members. Lastly, on this little part, programmers in particular were in high demand, and I guess at some point, Hiromochi Tanaka remembered fighting with Hironobu Sakaguchi over staff on the different games that they were working on. So, yeah, I guess there was just a lot of shuffling and moving around in this game.
I did not know that, and I didn't know those prototypes existed. And now I want to see what those prototypes look like and how they might have ended up getting repurposed as like other late era SquareSoft games.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wonder too, because like I also did a little reading that there was some detail about how this game was going to be more in line as a direct sequel to The Secret of Mana. So maybe that has something to do with it. I'm not exactly sure. But it would be interesting to see.
I don't think this came up on the episode you did with
Yeah.
Nadia, but have you ever read about how Secret of Mana and Chrono Trigger are kind of like twins?
I haven't, but I've had the thought myself just like looking at the games.
Yeah, so if you look at Chrono and Marley from Chrono Trigger, they look like the boy and girl from Secret of
Yes.
Mana, like very closely.
Oh yeah.
And that is presumed to be one of the like vestiges of the fact that like these were initially one game. And you can go
Oh.
back and see it was supposed to be this like big epic thing that got cut down. And I think it actually began on the Nintendo, on the Famicom. And then that's how long it was in development for. But these
Huh.
sort of preliminary versions of these games are fascinating to me because it allows us to see like how stuff changed and grew and what the creative decisions being made were. But now I want to see if I can find the prototypes for this game because I've never seen them before.
Yeah. I wonder if they're out there at all. That would be fun to see. Um, The second fact I have for you, I have titled Satellaview Demo, that has question marks on it. According to the Internet Archive, there's a scan of a Japanese gaming magazine of which I could not find a name for, and that there was actually a Satellaview demo of Seiken Densetsu 3 that was released on July 1st, 1995. Are you familiar with the Satellaview?
Only through reading about all the cool stuff that we didn't get in America.
Yeah.
So I like looked at playthroughs of weird builds of games that exist on that and nowhere else, but I never have heard of anything related to Secret of Mana on there.
Yeah, I'm mostly familiar with it because there was, I guess, like Satellaview releases of that was like a remix of the original Legend of Zelda game.
Yeah, and that's fast. Like the first time I saw that, I was like, "What is that? How can we
Yes.
have possibly have not gotten this?" And there's reasons, but it feels like unfair denial.
Yes,
Yeah.
I still want to play those versions. But so when I saw a detail about Satellaview, had to include it for the fun facts of this episode. Just for the listener, if you're not familiar, the Satellaview was a satellite modem peripheral produced by Nintendo for the Super Famicom in 1995, which allowed players to download games, magazines, and other media through satellite broadcasts provided by the Japanese company Saint Giga. It was released only in Japan and was discontinued in June 30th, 2000. But yeah, I guess there was a demo of this game way back when. And I think about this a lot. Maybe it's because I'm a heavy Retronauts listener or whatever, but thinking about games that will not be preserved in the way that they were experienced, whether it's like a live service game right now, a Fortnite, something like that. And these like demos and whatever was on Satellaview, I think about as well. Yeah, that's really the end of my thought. Any other thoughts on this little fact?
No, this is something that's like kind of only come to be something I care about in like maybe the last decade of my life. But
Sure.
like these little lost bits from video games that aren't preserved are fascinating to me because I really care about this as an art form, and I think it does deserve to be preserved, which is why I fully support the Video Game History Foundation and
Yes.
all the work they do. But just for like just the sake that they matter on their own, I get it. But like talking about those like lost prototypes, I think it is we don't have a lot of information as to the creative processes of the people that made these video games unless they do like a roundtable interview.
Yeah.
And I wish there was a way to get more information of like how did you come to make this thing that meant so much to me, what are the things that came together, what did you draw inspiration from. And I know that appetite exists in Japan as well, but even people who live there who could interview those people and speak fluent Japanese, they don't happen often enough. And I just wish that we could get more collective muscle power in behind making these sort of documents exist. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense, and I've been feeling something similarly lately. Like sometimes when playing a game, I wonder, especially, being someone who also writes and makes things, I sometimes when doing that, I don't have like a specific intention behind, especially if you're working on like a deadline.
Yeah.
I don't have a specific intention behind a certain choice. Oftentimes I do, and I wonder, like, I want to ask those sorts of questions.
Mhm.
Anyway, that'll do it for the Fact Me by Your Game segment. And I'll lead us into the final one of the episode, the game recommendations. Now, Drew, as you've heard on previous episodes of the show, this is my one forced tie into the movie Call Me by Your Name, where I am going to treat Seiken Densetsu 3 as your passionate summer fling in Italy. And it's not going to work out. You're going to break up, and I'm going to do my best to give you three potential new fling options, new dates, perhaps, for you to get over this heartbreak that you have. Because I find that familiarity goes a long way. So these are all going to have like something in common with the game you've brought on for today. So, first of which is I'll go ahead and recommend that if what you took away from this game was that you loved the cast of characters, that you found them being with each other and having their conversations was like the thing that really drew you in. But you'd rather play instead of an action RPG, you're looking for a modern JRPG. I'll recommend Yakuza Like a Dragon. Now, I'm almost sure you haven't played this since you since you have a Switch only.
I have not, in fact, played this. I've only listened to Retronauts about the Yakuza series.
Yes, a series that I have outside of this game zero experience with, but this is I don't know how familiar you are with this title, but for the first time they decided to make a like a proper JRPG. It's got some stuff in common with, like, how in Chrono Trigger when you're in a battle, like the characters might move around and that will change a possible strategy. This has a lot of that. It's a I can't speak for every recommendation. I can speak for this one, and it's great. So if you ever get the chance, Yakuza Like a Dragon's out there. If what really did it for you was choosing between your main characters, and you loved all the class systems that were possible, I'll go ahead and recommend a game that I think there's a chance you could have played this. Octopath Traveler. I know you played
Oh,
Triangle
yes.
Strategy. Do you like Octopath?
I do, and I love the vibe of these games, and it is modern 16-bit style updated in the right way, and that
Yes.
soundtrack is just so fucking good. Yeah, that is something I did latch onto and was successful with me. Haven't finished Octopath 2 though. Don't know. I just got busy with work and need to go
Yeah.
back to it. But it's one of those things where like if you fall off, you kind of forget where you are and kind of have to start over. But
Yeah.
we'll do one day.
Totally. I was so excited for one. I did the demo, I left feedback, I played it for 55 hours, never finished it, but loved it. And I have two. I have a sealed copy over here. Um, did you in it sounds like you liked that one a lot as well. I heard from many people that it was an improvement in ways. How did you feel?
I didn't get far enough with it to see how much of an improvement it
Mhm.
was, but I was told without getting too much spoiled for me that one of my principal objections to the first one is like there kind of is no come together moment
Yeah.
that I was looking for, which is a choice. And I heard that was corrected to an extent, but can't say how well they corrected
Okay.
it, but will one day. Worth the experience. Even if it didn't come together the way I wanted, it was a lovely game.
Awesome. Very cool. So that's your second recommendation. And for your final one is if Drew, for you, it's all about Kevin. If you love Kevin and you
Mhm.
just need to play a game with a half beast, half human, and absolutely nothing else matters to you, I'll recommend Disney's Beauty and the Beast for the Super Nintendo. You had mentioned actually that you had been familiar with some of like I think the Capcom Disney games from the
Uh-huh.
era. Do you know? I mean, maybe you haven't heard of this game, but
Oh, I've heard of it. So
yes,
here's the thing. Being a little gay boy and really trying to put out the vibe that like I'm tough and like don't pick on
yes,
me and like leave me alone. I was terrified to publicly show any affection for the girly Disney thing. So Aladdin was okay, but Little Mermaid and Beauty and the Beast, as beautiful as they were, I was like, I can't like these publicly
yeah,
because I'm worried people are gonna think I'm gay. Which is a really weird thought process. But as a result of this, I never played this Beauty and the Beast game, which looks great and I've heard is great. And Plain as the Beast is like the least gay thing, honestly. But
yeah.
yeah, you think it would have been okay. But I was scared. I was scared to be who I wanted to be back then.
Totally. That makes sense. So yeah, I guess like liking a property that's like, oh, it's Aladdin first and Jasmine sort of the like the love interest as opposed to
Mhm.
like one of the, premier princesses. That makes a lot of sense. I love to I was when you were talking about Kevin earlier, I was so satisfied because I was like, oh great. Well, I've got the
Mhm.
perfect recommendation for later, which is of course my goofy one for the day. But I'll run down the list too as we close out. We had for your recommendations today Yakuza Like a Dragon, Octopath Traveler, and Disney's Beauty and the Beast for the Super Nintendo. That'll do it for the recommendations. That'll actually bring us to the end of the show. So before we go and both plug whatever we'd like today again, Drew, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. It was really fun to get to know you, outside of, we didn't need Patrick and Mark here. We love them, but it was good to have a one-on-one. So thanks for doing this today.
Oh, thank you for having me. I need to confess that like I had some awareness of this show because people I know had been on it before,
Mhm.
and the people I know on Twitter are usually gay people. So like Oscar was on it and Mono was on it,
Yes,
and I assumed because of the name, it's like, oh, it's like a gay video game
of
podcast,
course. Yeah.
but hadn't listened to it yet. And then when I met you for the NCS thing, I was like, I don't think this guy's gay. And then I was looking at the thing and I was like, I don't think these people are gay. I was like, oh, it is not what I thought it was. And now
Yes.
I understand why it's called that. But I was like, confusing. And now has been clarified for me. And I enjoy the premise of this podcast. Thank you for making
Oh, thank you. Sorry for the confusion,
it.
and thanks for giving it a shot and coming on anyway. On our way out, I know we plugged a couple things earlier, but would you like to replug what you brought on?
Gayest episode ever, podcast about gay TV, thrilling tales of old video games, website about thrilling tales of old video games, and Singing Mountain is my video game music podcast that probably you'll find some cool Seiken Densetsu 3 music on there. I don't think I have Disney's Beauty and the Beast, but I might have
Oh,
used a track here and there. Some more than there's a lot of episodes. So
oh, we'll have
yeah.
to go ahead and do a deep dive and find out. But thank you again. I'll go ahead and just close this out with some plugs of my own. The show art for Call Me by Your Game is done by Glenn J. You can find him and his other great work on Instagram at Glenn with two N's .J-A-Y. The show is produced edited, and the music is by Jeremy Schmidt. If you want to give him a tip of the cap and a thank you for his contributions to my show, check out his podcast, Video Games, a Comedy Show, more of a roundtable style show that you can get wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can find me on social media at Connor_McCabe on Twitter and Instagram, and at Connor McCabe on Blue Sky. And you can also, of course, check us out on Patreon. If you like me and the conversations I have with people about video games, you're going to like a huge chunk of what you find over there. So if you want more shows and to support us financially, check us out there. We've got different stuff at different tiers, including a monthly version of this show called the Call Me By Your Game co-op series, where I have people on to discuss a game that we've either all played recently, a game from our past. It's it's less of a nostalgia focused show, and more of just like a brief overview. And coming up for October, which will be out I think by the time this podcast comes out, will be an episode on Firewatch, a great sort of walking simulator, narrative focused adventure. But anyway, you know where to find that. The links are in the show notes. That'll do it for this episode of Call Me By Your Game. We will see you on the next one.